9 days out from the city, the ground was perfect. That was the problem. My sounding kit read stable density for the third consecutive mile. The samples showed a flat compression profile without lateral shear or tidal displacement. Every sample came back baseline, the kind of readings you would expect from terrain that had never been touched by gravitational variance at all. According to the model, this stretch should have shown mild distortion by now. The survivable band was supposed to extend ahead of the city in a gradient, strongest at the center, weakening at the edges. I was walking the projected leading edge. I should have been measuring the first traces of safe zone influence, low-grade compression, slight density elevation, the gravitational equivalent of seeing the shore before you reach it. Instead, the readings stayed clean, flat, undisturbed. The band seemed to stop short of this ground. I marked the readings, logged the coordinates, packed the sounding rod back into its case. The kit weighed close to 40 pounds fully loaded. 20 of that was the rod itself, a 3-section steel probe that drove into the soil to measure resistance at depth. The rest was the transit scope, the ranging stakes, the sample jars. I carried all of it in a canvas pack rated for 12 days. This was day 9. I had food for 3 more. The city was behind me, a dark band on the western horizon. At this distance, it looked like a low ridge, something geological and permanent. In truth, the city sat on continuous rail, roughly 4 miles of structures running front to back, always moving. At the front, track crews were laying new rail right now, 20 or 30 yards per hour. At the rear, strip crews were pulling up old rail, tearing down the oldest buildings to recycle the materials forward. The whole thing inched across the plain like a slow machine digesting its own tail. My job was to walk ahead of it. I measured the ground, mapped the gravity, and identified every settlement, farm, camp, or community in the projected path. Then I decided what happened to them. The settlement I was approaching was called Ridley. 80-some residents, most of them farmers working a stretch of rain-fed ground about half a mile across. I had spotted their structures through the transit scope 2 days ago. By the current rate of advance, the city would reach Ridley's position in roughly 6.5 weeks. The official model said the gravitational band would arrive first. Mild compression, increasing in stages, until conditions became unsurvivable within days of the city's passage. Ridley's residents would experience the distortion whether they stayed or left. The only question was whether they evacuated early enough to avoid the worst of it, or whether they waited too long. That was where I came in. I evaluated the settlement, made the recommendation, filed the report. Evacuate or sacrifice. Those were the 2 classifications. Evacuate meant the Advance Corps would send a relocation team to move the settlement's population to approved ground outside the projected path. Sacrifice meant the settlement was too large, too entrenched, or too close to the rail line to move in time. The city would pass through. The residents would experience full compression. A Class 1 surveyor could reject an approved relocation site when field evidence showed instability, but the override triggered engineering review and made the surveyor liable for added provisions. I had filed sacrifice recommendations 11 times in 6 years. The number was specific because I remembered each one. That was the job. You remember them. Ridley would not be a sacrifice. 80 people, light structures, 6.5 weeks of lead time. I just needed to walk in, talk to whoever ran the place, survey the ground, file the numbers. But the numbers were wrong. The ground ahead of Ridley was perfect, the way ground is perfect when nothing has touched it at all. I told myself the instruments might need recalibration. That was the professional reflex. Suspect the tool before you suspect the model. I had been in the field for 9 days. Dust, temperature swings, vibration from walking. Sounding rods drifted. It happened. I noted the discrepancy in my log, adjusted nothing, kept walking. Ridley sat in a shallow depression, a dip in the plain so gradual you only noticed it from the change in vegetation. The grass was taller here, greener. The soil held more water. Someone's grandfather had been smart enough to settle where the rain collected. The buildings were mud brick with timber framing. Practical, low-slung, The kind of construction that could be taken apart in a few days if you were willing to lose the mud. I counted 14 structures spread across the depression. Livestock pens on the southern edge, a communal well near the center. A man walked out to meet me before I reached the first building. He was past 50, heavy through the shoulders, with hands that had been working soil since they were large enough to grip a tool. He watched me come down the slope with my pack, my sounding kit, the advanced core markings on my jacket. "You're a surveyor," he said. His tone made it a statement. "Pell Barton, Class 1, Advanced Core." "I'm Cody." He looked past me, back toward the horizon. The city's dark band was just visible. "How long?" 6.5 weeks, possibly closer to 6, depending on the track crews. Cody nodded. He did not look surprised. Settlements in the city's projected path always knew it was coming. The city was visible for weeks before it arrived, growing on the horizon like weather. What they did not always know was the timeline. That was my gift to bring. "You're here to tell us to move," Cody said. "I'm here to survey the ground first. File the numbers. The recommendation follows." "Come inside," he said. "We should talk before you start measuring things." Cody's house was the largest in Ridley. The main room served as a meeting space. He sat me down at a table made of salvaged planks. City timber, I noticed. Recycled material from the strip crews, traded or scavenged from the back trail. Most settlements outside the city used some amount of city scrap. It was the best milled wood on the plain. He poured water from a clay pitcher. No ceremony. He sat across from me. "Your people relocated 3 settlements last season," he said. "Moved them to approved ground east of the track." "That's right." "2 of those settlements are gone." I set my cup down. "Gone how?" "The settlements failed. The people scattered. The approved ground your corps selected. It was inside the trail. The compression trail. Within 6 months of relocation, the ground started breaking down. Buildings cracked, crops failed, the residents left. Most of them walked north. Some joined us here." He held up 2 fingers. 2 families. They told us what happened. I knew about post-relocation compression. It was a known risk. The Advanced Corps tried to place evacuated settlements outside the projected trail, but the trail's width was variable. Sometimes the compression zone spread wider than the models predicted. Sometimes the city's path curved after the relocation was filed. It was not a perfect system. "The approved sites are based on the best available projections," I said. "The band's width varies. I can't guarantee—" "I know you can't guarantee." Cody leaned forward. "That's not what I'm telling you. Those families watched the compression arrive. The ground hardened under their feet, then their walls cracked. Something they said stuck with me." He paused. "They said the danger didn't come before the city. It came with it, arrived alongside, like it was attached. People under stress see patterns that aren't—" "I'm not finished. I've lived on this plane my whole life, 53 years. I've watched the city pass 4 times, not through my settlement, but close enough to observe. Each time the ground ahead was fine. I could walk out right now toward the track, and the ground would be solid and ordinary, untouched by compression or distortion." He pointed behind me, toward the west, toward the city's back trail. "But behind the city? Every passage leaves a strip of ruined ground, flat and crushed hard as kiln-fired clay. The same width as the city, the same direction as the rail, every single time." He let that sit. "If the danger is natural," Cody said, "if the city is just following a safe band across a dangerous plain, why does the damage only appear after the city passes? Why isn't it there before? Why does it match the rail line like a shadow?" I did not have a good answer. The official model described the survivable band as a moving feature, a region of reduced gravitational strain that migrated across the plane for reasons not fully understood. The city tracked it. The compression zone was the dangerous terrain outside the band, terrain the city had left behind. But Cody's question was precise. If the danger zone was natural, its pattern should be irregular. It should spread in the shapes that geology produced: lobes, gradients, uneven borders. Instead, the backtrail was a ruled line. City width, city direction, every time. I had noticed the same thing in my own data. I had never put the observation together the way Cody just did. "I'll note your concerns in my report," I said. It sounded weak, even as I said it. "You'll note them." Cody sat back. "Your advance corps will file them somewhere. Nobody will read them. The city will keep coming. You'll recommend we evacuate to some approved patch that'll be inside the trail within a year. My people will lose their homes, their crops, their water. Some of them will die on the walk. The rest will build again on ground that's already condemned." He was not wrong about any of it. "The alternative," I said, "is that you stay. The city comes through. 80 people in full compression. I've seen what that looks like." "So have I." Cody did not look away. "I buried my father after the last passage. He was too stubborn to leave. By the time the compression hit, he aged 30 years in a week. His joints locked while his skin thinned like paper. His heart stopped on the 5th day. He was 61. He looked 90. The room was quiet. "You need to evacuate," I said. "Take the relocation, but move perpendicular to the track, not parallel. Get as much distance from the projected path as you can." "You mean perpendicular?" Cody studied me. "That's not what the approved sites say. They always put us parallel, along the edge." "I know what the approved sites say. Move perpendicular anyway. Farther out is better." It was the first time I'd ever deviated from the standard relocation guidance. I did not fully understand why I said it. Something about the pattern bothered me. The perfect line of the backtrail, the clean ground ahead, the model's predictions that never matched what I actually measured. Moving perpendicular felt safer than moving parallel to a track that seemed to follow the city like an exhaust trail. Cody studied me for a long time. Whatever he saw in my face was enough. "I'll tell my people," he said. I spent the night in Ridley and left at dawn. The walk back to the city would take 9 days. I carried my sounding kit, my log, enough of Ridley's dried provisions for the return, and the question he had planted in my head. Why does the backtrail match the city's path exactly? The ground beneath my boots was stable. Every reading I took on the return trip matched my outbound measurements. Ordinary ground density. The model said the survivable band's leading edge should be measurable out here. My instruments found only the plane's natural baseline. 9 days is a long walk when you are carrying a question you cannot put down. The city's forward edge was a wall of noise. Track layers drove steel spikes into fresh rail, while assembly crews hoisted timber frames onto new foundations, bolting together structures that would serve as housing for 10 to 15 days before the stripping crews took them apart at the other end. Tramway carts rattled along interior rails, carrying materials from the rear to the front in a continuous loop. The whole front section was a construction site, raw, loud, purposeful. I crossed through it quickly. The front crews were third-caste workers, born to the labour, trained from childhood. They kept working as I passed. My rank sat outside their chain of command. The mid-tiers were calmer. Here the structures had been standing for days. Solid, furnished, occupied by the permanent population. Shops, kitchens, a schoolhouse, the medical station. People lived here with a stability that was almost convincing, if you did not think about the fact that every building they occupied had been something else within the previous 2 weeks. Somewhere else. Bolted together from the bones of a previous structure that no longer existed. The city ate itself from behind. Everything was recycled. Only the engine was permanent. The engine sat in the ballast, a restricted section at the city's exact center, housed in a permanent carriage fixed in place within the moving structure and kept intact through every stripping cycle. The ballast was walled off. Only the engineering cast had access. Everyone else knew the engine existed. It was the mechanism that tracked the survivable band, the instrument that kept the city inside the safe zone. Its function was described in the school books, discussed in council meetings, referenced in every official document. Its physical details were classified. I had never seen it. I filed my report at the Advanced Corps Directorate, a narrow office in the mid-tiers staffed by 2 clerks. They logged my readings, noted the anomalous forward data, stamped my deployment as complete. The anomaly triggered a flag. Within a day, I was summoned to the engineering quarter. Greer's office was inside the engineering quarter, close enough to the ballast wall that I could feel the low vibration of something massive running beneath the floor. He was past 60, lean. He had my sounding data spread across his desk, my logs, my anomaly notes. "Your forward readings show no gravitational gradient," he said. "The last 40 miles of the outbound survey showed no gradient. The instruments were serviced before this deployment, calibrated and certified. I ran diagnostics in the field. The equipment is sound." Greer turned a page, read something, turned another. "Forward readings are inherently less reliable," he said. "The leading edge of the band is diffuse. Your sounding rod is calibrated for compression range density. It loses sensitivity at low gradients. What you're interpreting as absence may simply be sub-threshold presence. The readings aren't marginal, they're zero, identical to baseline, as though no band influence exists ahead of the city at all, which is consistent with the diffuse leading edge below your instrument's sensitivity floor. The sensitivity floor on a Class 1 sounding rod is 0.04 compression units. The model predicts at least 0.2 at my survey distance. That's 5 times the detection threshold." Greer looked at me. "The model is a projection, Barton. It's useful. It is not scripture. Conditions vary. You measured what you measured. The band's leading edge is weaker than projected at your survey distance. That's worth noting. It is not worth restructuring our understanding of gravitational migration." I let a moment pass. I also received information from a settlement leader, a man named Cody, at Ridley. He's observed 4 city passages over 50 years. He reports that the compression trail behind the city matches the city's path. Same width, same bearing, no variation. Greer's patience shifted into something cooler. Settlement residents are not qualified to interpret gravitational patterns. They see the trail behind the city and draw a line between them. Confirmation bias reinforced by generational repetition. "Is it?" Greer closed the file. "Your assignment is forward survey, Barton. Terrain stability. Settlement disposition. You do important work. The Advanced Corps depends on your data. What you are not assigned to do is rear trail analysis. The trail has been studied extensively by this department. Its characteristics are well understood. I would suggest you focus on your next deployment." He stood. The meeting was over. I left the engineering quarter with the files still flagged, the anomaly still unexplained, and the clear understanding that Greer had answered every question except the one I actually asked. Months had passed since I last walked the city's rear section. Most mid-tier residents stayed away entirely. The rear was where things ended, structures reduced to raw material, rail pulled up, the city's body consumed and hauled forward. It was the loudest section, the dirtiest, the most continuous. It was also where the lowest caste worked. The stripping crews operated in shifts around the clock. Their job was demolition. They took apart what the front crews had built, extracted every usable bolt, and loaded it all onto the tramway carts. Every usable piece moved forward. The city conserved everything. Each pound sent ahead spared the front crews from sourcing it on the empty plain. I walked through the stripping zone in the late afternoon. The crews were mid-shift. I watched them work for a while before the wrongness registered. The men were young. I knew this because the cast rosters listed their ages. I had reviewed the rosters as part of my general survey data. The stripping crews drew from males between 18 and 40. That was standard. The men working in front of me did not look like men between 18 and 40. They moved with the caution of older bodies, careful, measured, conserving. Their faces were lined, their hair thinned or grey. A man hauling a timber beam off a half-demolished wall had the posture of someone in his late 50s, curved spine, stiff hips, arms that reached carefully rather than grabbed. His roster age was 31. I found the shift foreman near the rear tramway loading point. His name was Marsh. According to the roster, he was 38. He looked close to 80. The skin around his eyes had the creped, translucent quality of advanced age. His hands were capable but careful, managing weight the way old men do, distributing it evenly, never jerking. "You're Advanced Corps," he said, looking at my jacket. "I'm Pell Barton, an Advanced Corps surveyor." "Long way from the front, Surveyor." "I wanted to see the rear sections. Haven't been back here in a while." Marsh shrugged. He gestured for a crew member to take over his loading station, then walked with me along the stripping line. We watched his men work, pry bars cracking joints, hammers knocking pins, the groan of timber frames pulled apart. "How long do men work back here?" I asked. "A rear man's career runs about 15 years on average. Some last longer, some don't." 15 years. Starting at what age? "Most start at 18. Sometimes 16 if the family needs the labour credit. So they work until their early 30s. Marsh gave me a look that carried equal parts amusement and contempt. "They work until they can't. Which is their early 30s, yes. By then the body's finished. They look like my grandfather did when he died at 79. He held up his own hands. The knuckles were swollen, the tendons visible under papery skin. "I've been rear cast for 20 years. I'll be done within the next 2 or 3. My replacement is 26. He already walks like a man of 45. "The drag," I said. The word came from somewhere in my memory. Rear cast slang for the aging effect. "The drag." Marsh nodded. "That's what we call it. The engineers call it occupational exposure to natural gravitational variance. We just know that working the rear makes you old." I looked down the stripping line. Every man I could see was visibly older than his roster age, some by 10 years, some by 20 or more. A young man, early 20s probably, was lifting salvaged steel brackets off a cart. He moved like he had arthritis in both shoulders. "Marsh, have you ever worked the front sections? The construction crews?" "I worked 2 6-month rotations back when they still did cross-cast transfers. Felt like a holiday. You come back here afterward, you can feel the difference in your joints within a week." The difference should not have been that severe. The official model described a mild gradient within the survivable band, slightly higher compression at the edges, slightly lower at the center. Front and rear sections were both inside the band. The variation was supposed to be negligible, a few percentage points of gravitational load. What I was seeing in Marsh's crews was not a few percentage points. It was decades of accelerated biological wear concentrated in men who should have been in their physical prime. A hammer struck twice behind us. The third blow never came. Marsh turned before I did. The young man with the steel brackets was halfway up a stripped wall frame, working a pin loose from a timber bay already slung to a tramway chain. The man's left shoulder failed first. I saw the arm drop without the hand releasing, the joint no longer carrying what the muscles asked of it. His weight shifted. The pin slid out. The timber bay rotated toward him. He tried to step down. His knee folded instead. The frame caught him across the upper back and drove him against the remaining wall. The chain took most of the fall. His breath left in one hard sound. His fingers stayed hooked around the pin. Marsh caught the chain and called for slack. 2 men took the hoist in measured increments, working around joints that could not survive a sudden pull. "Get your rod under the frame," Marsh said to me. I locked the lower sections of the sounding rod together and drove the shaft through an empty bolt channel beneath the frame. Marsh shifted the chain while I levered upward. The rod bowed. The trapped man tried to push with his right arm. His wrist bent under him. "Don't push with that arm," Marsh said, his tone hard. "You'll spend the other one." The crew raised the frame enough to pull him clear. He stood only with a man under each arm, his left shoulder low and forward. "Should he go to the medical station?" I asked. "No open break," Marsh said. "Station will bind the shoulder and send him to sorting." He was crushed against a wall. Held against one. Crushed is a different labor category. The men carried him away. Another worker stepped into his place before the hoist chain stopped moving. Where the frame had opened, a square of metal protruded from an interior cavity. It had been sealed between two timbers, not fastened to either surface. Marsh worked it free with the edge of his pry bar and handed it to me. The plate was roughly 6 inches square, scratched and dulled from years of reuse before it had been sealed inside the wall. "Old construction," he said. "Heavy gauge. Original fastening." I turned it over. One side was blank. The other had been etched. Fine lines, precise, done with an engraving tool. Numbers arranged in concentric rings, radiating outward from a central point. The rings were labelled with compression values. The values decreased with distance from the centre. At the centre, the value was highest. It was a radial displacement chart, a map of gravitational output spreading outward from a single source. The kind of diagram you would draw if you were measuring how much energy a machine pushed into the surrounding ground. The central point was labelled with a symbol I did not recognize, but its position on the plate, if the plate's orientation matched the city's layout, corresponded exactly to the ballast. "Mean anything to you?" Marsh asked. "I'm not sure yet. You surveyors understand markings. Figured you'd know." I put the plate in my pack. The sounding rod had a shallow bend and no longer collapsed cleanly. Marsh noticed. "Equipment office will charge you for that. They'll ask what happened. Tell them the ground resisted. That's what your reports always say." I thanked him. I walked forward through the stripping zone, through the mid-tiers, back to my quarters. The plate sat on my desk that night. I stared at the concentric rings, the values falling outward from a high center. I laid my own sounding data beside it. The compression gradient behind the city, compiled from years of rear survey data filed by every advanced corps surveyor who had ever walked the back trail. The gradient was well documented. Nobody had ever questioned its shape. It matched the plate's radial pattern almost exactly. If the plate was accurate, the compression did not migrate across the plane like weather. It radiated from a fixed point. The ballast. The engine. I was scheduled for forward deployment in 6 days. The city was advancing toward Ridley. Cody's people would need confirmed evacuation timelines. I was supposed to walk ahead, take readings, file numbers. Instead, I started planning a route to the back trail. I left the city at dawn on a forward deployment authorization. My log said east-northeast, toward the projected survey zone ahead of the city's path. I walked east-northeast for the first day, staying visible to the rear observation posts until distance swallowed me. On the second day, I turned south. I looped wide around the city's flank, crossed the former railbed 4 miles behind the rearmost stripping section, and entered the back trail. The ground under my boots went from loose, living soil to something closer to cement, compressed, dense. My sounding rod, driven into the surface, stopped at 8 inches. It should have sunk to 30 in normal terrain. The resistance index was 14 times baseline. That number described what had happened to the soil, not the force still acting on me. The ground retained the engine's passage more completely than the air above it did. I clipped the kit's calibration weight to the sounding rod's load gauge, 1 pound registered as 1.11, 11% residual load 2 weeks after passage. The active event had ended. A weaker field remained. I could feel it in my legs, not pain, heaviness. My boots hit the ground harder than they should have. My pack felt like it had gained 5 pounds. The sensation was subtle but specific, as though someone had dialed up the weight of everything I carried by a small, constant fraction. Structures were visible ahead. A settlement, one the city had passed roughly 2 weeks ago. I had the records in my field kit. The settlement had been offered evacuation. Most residents accepted. Some stayed. What I walked into had been a community of low stone buildings. The stone was intact technically, but the buildings had been pressed downward, as though an enormous weight had settled on every roof simultaneously. Walls that had stood 8 feet tall were now 5. Door frames had buckled inward. Timber lintels had snapped under loads they were never built to bear. The ground between the buildings was ridged with pressure lines radiating outward from the city's center line, the same pattern as the etching on the calibration plate. I passed a livestock pen. The ground's compression had driven the fence posts deeper into the earth. 2 feet of post that had been above the surface were now underground. Only the tops protruded, split from the lateral pressure. Inside the pen, a shape I did not immediately identify. I stopped, looked closer. A goat. Or what had been a goat. The animal's skeleton was compressed, ribs collapsed inward, spine bowed, skull flattened from above as though stepped on by something immeasurably heavy. The bones had not broken cleanly. They had buckled, bent, folded over each other in ways that spoke of sustained, crushing force applied to a living body over hours. The hide was still partially intact, dried and taut, shrink-wrapped to the distorted skeleton beneath. I moved on. There were more animal remains in the next pen. I did not examine them closely. I found the survivors on the settlement's eastern edge. 4 men. They had built a shelter from salvaged stone, low enough to withstand the compression that had destroyed their homes. A squat, thick-walled structure barely tall enough to stand in. They sat around a dead fire pit outside it. They looked up when I approached. The man who spoke first introduced himself as Dunhill and gave his age, 23. He had been 22 when the city passed, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks later, he looked 50. Deep lines cut across his forehead and around his eyes. His hair was thin, shot through with grey. His hands, when he reached for a water jug, moved with the tremor of late middle age. He stood to greet me, and the motion was effortful. Knees bending wrong, weight shifted to compensate for joints that no longer tracked smoothly. "You're only 23, I said. "That's what I said." His voice was hoarse, too old for the number. "We were fine before the city came. The ground was solid. Time was normal. We counted the days same as anyone." "What happened when the city arrived?" Dunhill sat back down carefully, the way Marsh's rear strippers sat, lowering himself in stages, protecting his spine. The other 3 men listened in silence. One of them, a quiet man who kept his name to himself, had lost most of his teeth. His gums had receded to the point where the remaining teeth sat loose in dark, swollen tissue. He was 24. "The city came from the northwest," Dunhill said, moving at its usual pace. "When the forward edge drew alongside, maybe a mile off, the compression started, mild at first. You could feel the ground getting harder under your feet, heavier feeling in your arms, your legs. We thought it was the natural band arriving, the way the surveyors always told us." He paused, rubbed his knees with both palms, a gesture I recognized from the stripping zone, the same unconscious motion Marsh's men used when their joints seized. Over the next several hours, as the city's bulk moved past, the effect got worse. Ground hardened until you couldn't dig it with a shovel. Structures started cracking, the mortar first, then the stone itself. I tried to brace a doorway. My arm felt like it weighed twice what it should, like I was lifting against something that kept adding weight. Then the time part hit. He said it simply, like naming a phase of weather. It wasn't sudden. The days got longer, not the sunlight. The sun moved the same. But I could feel more happening inside me. My beard grew faster. My nails. I started getting tired more quickly. My knees started hurting. Then my back. He looked at his hands. The city passed us in about 12 days. Their time. For us it was months. I counted at first. I stopped counting at 90 days, when the city was still visible on the horizon. By the time it was truly gone, far enough that the compression eased, I had been through the better part of a year. He was quiet for a moment. Kemp died on day 60. He nodded toward a low mound of stones behind the shelter. His heart. He was 20. What did you do? Everything that still worked. We had heart salts in the storehouse, 40 yards from here. Walker and I tied our waists together, so if one went down, the other could pull. He pointed toward the remains of a stone building whose doorway had collapsed to the height of my chest. We had to crawl under the roof. Walker cracked a rib at the lintel. He kept going. The case weighed 3 pounds before. Coming back, it took both of us. Kemp was alive when we reached him. We couldn't lift his head without stopping his breathing. We mixed the salts on the ground and fed them with a strip of cloth. Half ran into the dirt because my hand wouldn't stay high enough. His heart stopped before the dose was finished. The quiet man beside him looked toward the burial mound. Dunhill did not. Walker went on day 70-something. The rib never set. Another broke when he rolled, then his wrist when he tried to rise. We made a sling from a door skin and stopped turning him. He died facing the wall because moving him again would have broken more. He took a breath shallow enough that his chest barely moved. The rest of us survived because we stopped moving unless we had to. We ate what we had stored. We waited. I set up my sounding kit on the settlement's center line. The bent section caught, and I forced the lock against my thigh. By the third reading, my hands shook from holding the probe upright under the residual load. I plotted the gradient point by point against the city's projected centerline. I overlaid the calibration plate's radial pattern. The match was exact. The compression radiated outward from a single point on the city's track, the position the engine would have occupied when the city passed this settlement. Strongest at the center. Weakening with distance, radial, symmetrical, as precise as the diagram etched on a metal plate hidden inside a wall. The ground ahead of the city was clean because the engine had not reached it yet. The ground behind was destroyed because the engine had already passed. The survivable zone inside the city existed because the engine displaced gravitational strain outward, pushing it into the soil, the structures, the bodies of everyone outside the city's footprint. The compression, the time distortion, the aging, the crushed buildings, the dead livestock, the ruined settlements. All of it radiated from the engine. All of it was the engine's output. The model was wrong. The safe band was not a natural feature the city tracked across a hostile plane. The engine created it. The engine was the source of every compression event, every time distortion, every settlement I had ever marked for sacrifice. The plane was normal. The plane had always been normal. The danger was the city itself. I packed my instruments. Dunhill was watching me. "You knew," I said. "We guessed." Dunhill coughed, a deep, rattling sound from lungs that should have been young. "Hard not to, when you watch the city roll past and the world breaks behind it like a wake." I walked north, out of the back trail. The compressed ground gave way to normal soil over the course of about 2 miles. The transition was sharp, hard terrain on one side, loose earth on the other. A border as clean as a line drawn with a rule. The sun was low, the city's bulk was visible to the northwest, a dark band inching across the plain. Moving, always moving. The construction cranes at its front edge caught the last light. Behind it, the back trail stretched to the horizon, a strip of crushed, ruined ground the exact width of the rail line. I turned west, toward the city, toward the engine that was making the world uninhabitable, while every schoolbook inside called it salvation. I did not go through the Advanced Corps Directorate. I walked straight to the engineering quarter, through the corridor along the ballast wall to Greer's office. He was working at his desk. He looked up when I entered, saw my face, set down his pen. I placed the calibration plate on the desk in front of him. Next to it, my field charts, the compression gradient from the back trail settlement, plotted point by point against the plate's radial pattern. The forward readings showing 0 distortion across 40 miles. The back trail readings at 14 times baseline. Greer studied the materials without touching them. His eyes moved from the plate to the charts, from the charts to the forward data, back to the plate. He picked it up, traced the concentric rings with his fingertip. "Where did you find this?" "A rear stripper named Marsh pulled it from a wall near the ballast. Old construction, original fastening. You went into the back trail." "I went into the back trail. I measured the compression gradient behind a settlement the city passed 2 weeks ago. I talked to the survivors. I plotted every reading against this plate. I tapped the field chart. The match is exact. The compression radiates from a single point, the engine's position. Greer set the plate down. He stood, walked to his office door, closed it, and turned the lock. Then he came back to his chair. He gathered the plate and my charts into one stack and moved them to his side of the desk. "Those are mine," I said. "They are unauthorized engineering records and rear trail measurements obtained under a false deployment route. They are now department material." He opened the drawer beside him and placed the calibration plate inside. He left the charts on the desk. "Who else knows what the plate shows?" "Marsh found it. He didn't know what it was." "Who else?" "4 survivors saw me compare it to the readings. They already knew the city caused the damage." Greer looked at the bent sounding rod case. "You falsified a route log. I can revoke your certification or assign you to internal survey, where every instrument and conversation is supervised. Then the next surveyor takes Ridley." "That is correct. He'll send them northeast, 6 miles from the track." Greer's expression did not change. The pause did. "Marsh stays on his crew. You don't question him about the plate. You are not in a position to set terms. I have no position to bargain from, but you haven't called the guards. That means my field access is worth something to you." "Removing your field access would not remove what you know," he said. "It would only make you visible. And leaving it lets me keep settlements farther from the trail. Within the existing model, without telling them why, without creating a pattern obvious enough to trigger review. The cage left me exactly that much room." "You're correct," he said. "The engine generates the survivable zone. It displaces gravitational strain outward to maintain reduced conditions inside the city's footprint. The compression, the time distortion, that is displaced energy settling into the surrounding terrain." He stated it like an engineering specification stripped of defense or apology. "How long has the department known?" "Since the beginning. The founders designed it. Every senior engineer since has inherited the knowledge. Every schoolbook in this city teaches that the gravitational band is natural, that the engine tracks it. That is what the schoolbooks teach. That has been a lie for over 200 years. Greer folded his hands on the desk. "It has been a policy for over 200 years. The distinction matters, Barton, and I need you to understand why before you do anything with what you've found." He opened a drawer and removed a ledger, thick, leather-bound, with entries in several different handwritings stretching back through generations. He turned to a page near the middle. A single number was updated there annually, each entry written by whoever served as senior engineer at the time. The current entry was in Greer's precise script, 231. "That number is the gravitational debt," Greer said, "measured in equivalent years of full compression. It represents the total accumulated strain that the engine currently holds in suspension." Explain suspension. "The engine does not destroy the strain it displaces. It relocates it, pushes it outward, but maintains a tethered connection to every unit of energy it has ever moved. Think of it as a balance held open by force. The engine supplies the force. If it loses power, the balance begins to fail. A brief outage leaks part of the strain. Once suspension fails completely, the remaining debt collapses. The displaced strain comes back. The failure begins the instant power drops. Any strain that escapes suspension manifests through the engine's active field, the 4-mile operational footprint carried with the city. Rail, structures, machinery, 200,000 people. I looked at the number again. 231. If suspension fails completely, that is 231 years of compression delivered in a single moment. "The full accumulated debt resolves at once," Greer said. "What does that look like?" "Consider a brief interruption first. A 10-second power loss, quickly restored. That would expose the city to roughly 6 years of equivalent strain without reducing the suspended debt. Every person inside the footprint experiences 6 years of concentrated gravitational load in 10 seconds. Bones compress, joints fuse, spinal columns shorten by inches. Most survive, but the injuries are permanent. Based on population density, roughly 2,000 people die, mostly the elderly, mostly from vertebral collapse. He paused. Now consider a full shutdown, 231 years. Every person in the city passes through the equivalent of maximum gravitational load for over 2 centuries in the space of a breath. Bones powder under the load. Tissue races through its entire biological cycle in under a second. Skin, muscle, organ, every stage from functioning tissue through full decomposition, leaving organic residue and powdered bone. The structures above collapse to a fraction of their height. The rail compresses into the ground. The ground itself compacts into something closer to bedrock. He stopped there. The description was sufficient. Can the engine be throttled? I asked. Reduced output, slow discharge. The founders built a fixed output mechanism. It runs at one level. There is no variable setting. Can the debt be discharged in stages, release a year at a time, evacuate sections, manage the damage? The engine has no controllable partial setting. While powered, it holds the debt. During a brief outage, suspension degrades and part of the strain manifests through the field. But restoring power only recontains it. The debt is not reduced. If power is not restored, the balance fails completely. I have spent 20 years looking for a way around that. Can it be redirected? Push the debt somewhere else, onto empty ground? The debt is tethered to the active field. It collapses wherever the engine is operating. The engine cannot be separated from the ballast carriage without breaking suspension, and the ballast cannot leave the rail system that carries its load. There is no remote discharge line. Then evacuate the city first. Move people outside the field. Keep the engine running until the last person is clear. Then let the empty structures take the collapse. Greer did not answer immediately. That is the only proposal that survives the physics, he said. It does not survive the city. Why would the plan fail? 200,000 people cannot walk out in a week. Most have no transport, shelter, or food system beyond the city. The engine requires furnace crews, machinists, track crews, water crews. Remove too many and maintenance fails. Move them slowly and the process takes 12 to 18 years while the trail continues. Call it a migration. Build settlements ahead. Don't tell them about the debt until the population is dispersed. With what authority outside the rail? Which settlements surrender water for 200,000 strangers? Which caste leaves first while the others remain protected? The lie that keeps them calm is the same lie that makes voluntary dispersal impossible. So it has never been tried. It has been calculated by every senior engineer for a century. Calculation is not execution. The moment the real reason becomes public, the timetable ceases to be ours. Someone tries the engine before the first 10,000 are clear. There was a seam, but it depended on years of trust the city had spent 2 centuries making impossible. It was not a handle I could reach. Why does the city move? I asked. If the engine generates the zone, why not stay in one place? Because the displacement is continuous. If the city stops while the engine runs, the compression zone expands radially. A growing circle of devastation centered on the ballast, spreading outward at a fixed rate. Movement stretches the displacement into a linear trail, a scar instead of a crater. It is the least destructive operating mode. Stopping is worse. And stopping the engine is... A full shutdown releases 231 years, Greer said. I sat with it. The immediate trap was complete. The engine could not be stopped, slowed, redirected, or modified without years of preparation. The city could not safely begin. Running it destroyed the world outside. Stopping it destroyed the city inside. Every hour, the debt grew. Why not tell people? Greer leaned back. His expression carried the clinical distance of a doctor delivering a familiar prognosis. Think it through, Barton. You tell the population that the gravitational danger is manufactured, that the engine creates it, that the plane outside is safe. What happens? People demand the engine be shut down. They demand it immediately and loudly, with absolute moral certainty. They will be right. The engine is destroying every community it passes. It is the source of every death outside the city. The ethical position is obvious. Stop the machine. But if they stop it, everyone inside dies. 200,000 people, compressed, aged, powdered, in a second. Greer's hands were still folded. The population will not believe the debt is real. Or they will believe it and decide that 200,000 deaths are preferable to the ongoing destruction of every settlement on the plane. There will be factions. There will be arguments. Someone will attempt to reach the engine. Someone will try to force a shutdown to prove the engineers are lying about the consequences. And the moment someone succeeds, even for 10 seconds, 2,000 people die. Bones crushed, spines collapsed, because someone wanted to test whether the engineers were telling the truth. He unfolded his hands, placed them flat on the desk. My concern is the lives of 200,000 people and the consequences of knowledge they cannot act on safely. There is no safe public action available now. The truth, released without years of preparation, produces political pressure toward a shutdown that would kill everyone it is intended to save. I understood the immediate logic. I understood it completely. It was airtight over the span in which people would demand action, built from real numbers and real consequences. Greer was not a tyrant. He was a warden standing between a population and a bomb that detonated when you tried to defuse it. The logic was also monstrous. It meant the city would keep running for years, perhaps decades, while the only distant exit remained trapped on paper, destroying every settlement, every community, every person outside the footprint. It meant Ridley. It meant Dunhill. It meant every sacrifice I had ever filed. Every one of those losses was the exhaust of a machine that should never have been built. "I want to see the engine," I said. Greer studied me for a long time. "You surrender the original charts. Your official route remains forward survey. You speak to no one in the city about the source or the debt. I mark your certification with an engineering review restriction. It stays active while your reports remain defensible. Force me to choose between your access and the engine, and I remove your access." "What happens to Marsh?" "Returns to work tomorrow. No interview." It was the only answer he gave about the men outside the city. Then he nodded. "Come back tomorrow. I'll arrange access." The ballast was larger than I expected. The restricted section occupied the city's entire center carriage, a permanent structure roughly 200 yards long, built heavier than anything else on the rail. The walls were double-thickness steel plate. The floor was reinforced beneath my feet in ways I could feel but not see. Everything here was built to last. Everything here was permanent. Greer walked me through a security gate, 2 engineering caste guards who checked my authorization without expression, and into the engine chamber. The engine filled the space, a system of connected components. Massive rotors sat in housings that extended below the floor into the lower chamber. Coal furnaces vented through the carriage roof and fed the power systems. At monitoring stations, junior engineers tracked output on graduated dials. The rotors turned at a speed I could feel in my body. The vibration was below audible range, a pressure in the chest and inner ear that made balance uncertain for the first few steps. I stood in the central walkway between the rotor housings. The displacement mechanism occupied the lower chamber. I could see it through grated floor panels, a complex assembly of weighted arms, counterbalances, and drive shafts rotating around a central axis. I did not understand the physics. I understood the effect. This was the thing that pushed the world's weight away from the city and onto everyone outside it. Greer gave me access to the operational records. They filled a cabinet along the chamber's rear wall, handwritten ledgers going back generations. Each senior engineer had maintained the logs, documented the debt total, recorded maintenance events, noted anomalies. I spent hours in that cabinet. The junior engineers ignored me. They were accustomed to Greer's authority and did not question why a surveyor was sitting on the floor of the ballast reading 100-year-old ledgers. I found the founder's documentation near the bottom of the cabinet, in a leather case cracked with age. The handwriting was different from everything above it, quicker, less formal. The notes of working scientists rather than institutional custodians. The founders built the engine for industrial gravitational manipulation on a plane whose natural state was uniform, moderate, and perfectly suitable for habitation. The team consisted of 5 engineers whose names I did not recognize. Their goal was to create a localized zone of reduced gravity that made construction, manufacturing, and transport more efficient. Materials would weigh less. Workers would bear less strain. A productivity tool. They had succeeded. The engine created a zone of reduced gravitational load inside its operational footprint. Construction became easier. Materials weighed less. Workers tired more slowly. The first generation celebrated. They discovered the displacement effect within the first year of operation. The reduced gravity inside the zone came at a cost, increased gravity outside. The strain had to go somewhere. It went into the surrounding ground, structures, and people. The founders documented the effect in their notes, measuring the compression gradient and calculating the rate of debt accumulation. That left them a window. In the first year, the total debt was small, roughly 10 months of equivalent compression. A shutdown would have been harsh. People inside the footprint would have experienced 10 months of increased gravitational load in an instant. The shock would injure them, but most would survive. They chose not to stop. The notes showed the choice unfolding quietly through daily operation rather than through a dramatic debate or formal vote. The engine kept running because it was useful, and reduced gravity was comfortable. Stopping meant giving up the advantage. The debt would resolve as a harsh, injurious shock, and nobody wanted to face it that day. Tomorrow was always better. Next month, next year. By the end of the second year, the debt had grown past 20 months. Still survivable, but the shutdown would now cause broken bones, joint damage, lasting disability. The window was closing. The founders acknowledged this in their notes with the detached concern of men who could see the problem clearly, but were not yet frightened enough to act. By the 5th year, the debt exceeded 4 years of equivalent compression. A shutdown would kill a significant percentage of the population. The window had closed. The third generation of engineers, the founders' apprentices, invented the natural danger narrative. They described the plane as gravitationally hostile, the engine as a tracking device, the city's movement as a survival necessity. The lie was elegant because it explained every observable fact. The compression outside the city was real. The danger of leaving the city was real. The only thing the lie changed was the cause. I closed the leather case. I sat on the floor of the ballast with the engine turning above me, around me, beneath me. The vibration ran through the steel plating and into my bones. I was sitting inside the source of every death I had ever documented. The engine was a machine. It turned because the coal burned. The coal burned because the furnace crews fed it. The furnace crews fed it because the city needed the engine. The city needed the engine because stopping it would kill everyone. It would kill everyone because the founders had chosen comfort over a hard correction 2 centuries ago. I returned to the operational ledgers. I found what I was looking for in a sub-ledger maintained separately from the main debt record, the rear stripper mortality data. The engineering cast tracked everything. Average lifespan of rear cast workers broken down by years of service, biological age versus calendar age at retirement, biological age versus calendar age at death. The numbers were precise, updated annually going back over 100 years. The rear strippers aged at roughly 3 times the rate of mid-tier citizens. A man who worked the rear for 15 years accumulated roughly 45 years of biological wear. The engineers knew this. They had always known it. The crew rotation schedules were designed around it. Shifts calibrated to keep the attrition rate below 5% per year. High enough that the work got done, low enough that the rear cast population did not collapse or organize. The system called it management. The rear strippers were a known, measured, budgeted cost of keeping the engine running. Their abbreviated careers, ruined bodies and early deaths were accounted for in the operational ledgers. A second sub-ledger carried the advanced core seal. I opened it expecting terrain tables. Instead, I found settlement dispositions cross-referenced against route efficiency, salvage yield, resistance probability, and projected external attrition. Evacuation and sacrifice were not only humanitarian classifications. They told engineering how much interruption to expect when the city reached a community and what material the strip crews might recover afterward. I found Marlowe on the 4th page of the current volume. 117 residents, stone cisterns, 2 mills. Sacrifice approved 6 years earlier by Class 1 Surveyor Pell Barton. I remembered the woman who had met me beside the north well. She had asked whether the advance corps would leave their grain doors unbarred so anyone surviving behind the passage could take what remained. I had told her the strip crews followed salvage procedure. I had written the recommendation that night. The engineering column beside my signature read, route deviation not justified. Expected biological attrition, 86-94%. Recoverable iron, 3.2 tons. Delay allowance, 0. I turned pages. All 11 were there. My decisions reduced to load, delay, and salvage. The city used my reports to warn people about danger and decide whether they were worth steering around. I copied nothing. Greer had 2 junior engineers within sight of the cabinet. I read each entry twice and returned the ledger to its shelf with my thumb pressed over my own seal until the leather closed. I searched for alternatives. The engineering assessments showed generations asking the same questions. Variable output failed in every model. Decoupling the ballast broke suspension before the carriage cleared the city. A second field risked amplification rather than cancellation. Population dispersal was the one proposal that survived the physics. There were 12-year plans, 18-year plans, settlement grids, ration projections, labor release schedules, maintenance thresholds. Every version required the engine to keep damaging the plane while the city built the capacity to abandon itself. It also required mass cooperation with an unexplained exile or disclosure without an early shutdown. None advanced beyond paper. Every immediate door was closed. The distant one required time, trust, territory, and authority the system prevented from accumulating outside the ballast. The founders had created the trap by choosing to keep the engine running past the point of survivable shutdown. Every generation since had inherited a worse version of it. The debt grew. The trail lengthened. The settlements died. The city moved. I returned the ledgers to the cabinet. I walked out of the ballast, past the guards, back into the mid-tiers. The city was moving beneath me, the constant subtle vibration of the rail. 200,000 people going about their evening. Cooking, talking, putting children to bed. Above them, the sky was bronze with late light. Below them, the engine turned. Around them, the world paid for their comfort in crushed ground and stolen years. My next deployment orders came 3 days later. Forward survey east-northeast. The city was now close enough to Ridley that evacuation timelines needed confirmation. I packed my kit, drew provisions, filed my route log. Greer remained silent when I collected my authorization stamp from the engineering liaison. The silence between us had held since the ballast. The arrangement was clear. I knew everything and could do nothing openly with it. The knowledge changed only the man carrying it. I walked out through the forward construction zone at dawn. The track crews were working a new section, spikes driven, rail bolted, the city extending itself one more length into clean ground. Ground that was normal. Ground that the engine had not yet reached. The walk to Ridley took 8 days. I used the time the way I always used long transits, checking terrain, taking readings, cataloguing the landscape. The work was the same. My hands did the same things they had always done. The sounding rod drove into soft, undisturbed soil. The transit scope swept clean horizon. The readings came back baseline. The difference was that I no longer expected anything else. The ground ahead would always be normal. It would stay normal until the city arrived. Then the engine would push fresh gravitational strain into the soil, the structures, the bodies of everyone too slow or too stubborn to move, while the accumulated debt held in suspension grew slightly larger every day. That was the sequence. That had always been the sequence. Ridley was visible from 4 miles out. The cluster of mud brick buildings in their shallow depression, the green patch of taller grass. As I got closer, I could see activity. Carts loaded with bundled belongings, timber frames being disassembled, livestock being herded into travel groups. They were preparing to evacuate, following my original recommendation. Cody met me at the settlement's edge. "Surveyor, you're back sooner than I expected," he said. "The city is moving faster than projected. You have about 2 weeks." Cody nodded. He walked with me through the settlement. People were packing with the organized urgency of a community that had done this kind of preparation before. Bundles wrapped in cloth, tools stacked in order of necessity, water containers filled and sealed. Children carried what they could. Older men directed the loading of carts. "We're moving to the approved site," Cody said. "Northeast of the projected path. Your corps sent coordinates last week." I stopped walking. Cody stopped with me. "Don't use those coordinates," I said. Cody looked at me, waited. "The approved site is parallel to the city's track, close to the projected path. If the city's route curves, which it does depending on terrain and the track crew's decisions, that site could be inside the compression trail within a year. You told me to move perpendicular last time. I'm telling you again, move perpendicular to the track, due south, as far as you can. Do not settle near the city's projected path. Do not settle near the back trail. Get distance." Cody studied me. He was a man who had survived 53 years on an open plain. He knew when someone was giving him official guidance and when someone was giving him something else. "Why should we move south?" he asked. "What changed since your last visit?" I could have told him everything. The engine, the debt, the founder's choice. The 231 years of accumulated strain that grew by the hour. Every settlement the city had ever passed was a target in the engine's wake, its losses caused by the machine rather than natural forces. The full truth was a weapon with no safe target. If Cody spread it, if settlements organized, if the information reached the city's population, the political pressure Greer described would follow. Demands to stop the engine, attempts to force a shutdown, 200,000 dead in a compressed instant. I gave him the practical minimum. The danger follows the city. It does not precede it. The approved relocation sites are too close to the path. The compression trail is wider than the models account for, and it is not natural. Move south, move far. Do not stop within 20 miles of the track. Cody absorbed this. "You're telling me the city causes the damage. I'm telling you to move perpendicular and get distance." "That's the same thing, Surveyor. You just said it without saying it." I did not argue. He was right. Cody looked back at his settlement. The packing, the loading, the organized dismantling of everything his people had built. He had watched this happen before. He would probably watch it happen again, wherever they settled next. The city would keep moving. The plain was vast but finite. Somewhere, eventually, there would be nowhere left to go. "Come with us," Cody said. I had thought about it. Outside the engine's range, gravity and time behaved normally on stable ground. Everything I had spent my career measuring as threat was simply absent beyond the city's influence. The danger had always been back there, inside the machine. "If I leave," I said, "the next surveyor takes my routes. He follows the official model, approves the standard relocation sites parallel to the track, and files sacrifice recommendations based on a lie he believes completely. Every settlement he evaluates gets the same guidance. Every evacuation goes to approved ground that will be crushed within a year." Cody waited. "I can adjust the coordinates. I can steer evacuations perpendicular, build distance into the relocation plans. Bury the changes in technical language. It's a small correction. It does not fix anything. But it means 80 people here, 100 people there, end up farther from the trail. A few more years of normal ground before the city's path curves back toward them. That's what you're offering. A few more years. That's all I can reach. Cody looked at me. We'll go south, he said. Due south, 20 miles. At least 20. 30 is better. Cody turned back toward his settlement. He called out to a man loading a cart, gave directions, pointed south. The man nodded, adjusted his loading. The change rippled through the group in small corrections. Carts reoriented, provisions redistributed for a longer walk. I filed my report that evening, sitting on the ground outside Ridley with my field kit open on my knees. The approved northeast site lay on a shelf of dense clay above an old drainage seam. The site itself was safe. I sampled the seam anyway, driving the bent rod where the clay was hardest and recording the highest resistance at each depth instead of the median. All the numbers were real. From those numbers I shaped a false conclusion. I approved the evacuation. I invoked the Class 1 site rejection provision and modified the relocation coordinates, shifting them from the Advance Corps' approved site to a point 32 miles due south of the projected track. Elevated subsurface resistance at the approved site, I wrote. Phase lag across the drainage seam consistent with future lateral shear under projected band migration. Standard 6-mile offset insufficient. Recommend alternate site at the following coordinates. The southern route added 11 days and exceeded the water allotment. I transferred 3 advance camp ration crates to Ridley against my labor credit if the destination failed inspection. Cody watched me seal the report. Those readings true? He asked. The readings are. And the rest? I pressed my Class 1 seal into the wax. The rest is a recommendation. He looked towards the carts being turned south. That's what you called it the first time. I closed the field kit. This one costs me if I'm wrong. Are you? Not about where you should go. I left at dawn alone. Cody had every reason to stay with his people. To him, I was a man inside the machine who had given him a slightly better set of numbers. That was all. The walk back to the city took 8 days. The ground was stable. Every reading was baseline. The plain stretched in every direction, flat, open, quiet, ordinary terrain. The kind of ground you could build on. The kind of ground that would stay solid for a lifetime, for generations, until a 4-mile city rolled across it and pushed fresh gravitational strain into the soil, adding to the 2 centuries of debt held in suspension. On the 7th day, I could see the city on the horizon, the dark band, the construction cranes at the forward edge, the dust of demolition at the rear. Between them, 200,000 people inside a zone of reduced gravity, inside a lie older than anyone still breathing, inside a machine still running, because the only exit required years the city had never prepared for. The ground under my boots was soft, undamaged, alive in the way ground is alive when rain falls on it, when roots hold it, when nothing has compressed it into stone. I took a reading out of habit. Baseline. Perfect. I packed the sounding rod, shouldered my kit, and walked toward the city. The cranes grew larger with each mile. The rail line appeared, twin steel tracks running east to west, fresh laid, gleaming where the construction crews had just finished bolting the latest section. Ahead of the rail, the ground was clean. Behind it, somewhere over the western horizon, the back trail carved its ruled line through everything the city had left behind. I stepped onto the rail bed. The vibration was immediate, the constant tremor of the engine running beneath the city's center. I had felt it 1,000 times without understanding it. Now I knew. It was slightly more than 231 years of accumulated debt, held in suspension by a machine that could not be stopped now without killing everyone inside it. Built by men who could have stopped it and chose not to. Maintained by men who knew the only remaining exit required years of preparation no one had begun. I walked through the construction zone. The track crews were working. The front layers did not look up. I passed into the mid-tiers and filed my deployment report. The first clerk read the site rejection provision twice, comparing its depth curve to my earlier baseline readings. Your outbound survey shows no forward compression, she said. This is subsurface resistance, not active compression. At one drainage seam, the approved site covers 3 square miles. A shear failure starts at the seam, not evenly across 3 square miles. She pointed to the alternate coordinates. 32 miles exceeds standard relocation radius. Class 1 override. That override requires engineering review when the added route consumes city provisions. The second clerk found Greer's restriction code on my certification and slid the report back. Senior engineering liaison wants the anomaly stated as projected band migration, he said, not confirmed instability. The distinction protected both the model and my conclusion. I crossed out one phrase, wrote the approved language, and signed beneath the change. The first clerk held out her hand for the damaged sounding rod. Equipment loss will be charged pending inspection. Put it against my labor credit. The relocation provisions already exceed your quarterly credit. Then put both against next quarter. She looked at me, then at the report. If the southern site fails inspection, the settlement returns to standard coordinates and you lose field discretion for a year. By then, Ridley would be 32 miles south. I'll take the restriction. The stamp came down on the relocation page. Approved. I returned my kit to the equipment room. The numbers were defensible. The coordinates were south. I went to my quarters and sat on my bunk. Through the wall I could feel the city moving. The slow, grinding progress of 4 miles of rail-bound structure inching across the plain. Somewhere ahead of us, past the horizon, there were settlements I had yet to visit, communities I had yet to evaluate, and people I had yet to warn. I would walk out to them, take my readings and file reports with coordinates adjusted south, away from the trail, buying each group a few more years on stable ground. The correction remained painfully small, nowhere close to enough. The city would keep moving. The engine would keep running. The debt would keep growing. The plane would keep paying. But 80 people in Ridley were walking south tonight, instead of northeast. 32 miles from the track instead of 6. On ground that would stay solid longer than the approved site by years. Maybe a decade. Maybe more, depending on the track crew's route. The dispersal plans in the ballast had failed for want of food, water, shelter, and trust outside the rail. 80 people living farther south could add a small piece of the capacity those plans had never possessed. It was the smallest possible correction to the largest possible wrong. I would make it again tomorrow. I would keep making it until someone noticed, or until there was no one left ahead of the city to correct for.